Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The latest hot take from a man who's in the business of hot takes for shock value in order to elicit reactions. Post-fight, Stephen A. Smith was quoted as saying that Errol Spence Jr., after suffering just his first professional loss, should consider retirement. Is he saying this for shock value? Is he saying this for reactions? Or is he touching on something real? And, you know, Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, Skip Bayless, these kinds of guys, they're literally in the business of hot takes, saying things that might ruffle people's feathers. So a lot of people reacting to this adversely. Some people found it downright insulting that after just one professional loss, his very first this past Saturday, Stephen A. Smith, whose forte really isn't even boxing anyway,
doesn't cover the sport in-depthly, just the big fights, the big ones.
Fights that the broadcasters feel move the needle more than your run-of-the-mill boxing match, your run-of-the-mill fight. In truth, boxing really isn't Stephen A. Smith's forte, but for a number of years, he has been known to chime in on the sport.
This is his latest hot take, that Errol Spence Jr., after looking the way that he looked on Saturday, he should consider retirement. And it would be easy to dismiss Stephen's comments as more hot takes.
More nonsense from a casual, a guy who doesn't really know the sport of boxing, but he's not the only one I've seen saying this. I've seen a number of people express concern, an outpouring of it, that based on how Errol looked and how he reacted to Terence Crawford's punches,
he should consider retirement.
Stephen isn't the only person since this past weekend's fight I've seen say that Errol might need to hang them up. And you have to wonder, where is this coming from? Is there anything to this concern being expressed? Is there anything to this at all? And I think the reason that people are saying this is because they know the last 4 years, Errol Spence Jr.'s body has been through a lot. The car accident where he landed on his face, the detached retina that saw him benched in the year of 2021, and the beating that he just took this year.
Car accident in 2019, detached retina in 2021, and the beating in 2023. What looked like a career-changing beating, a life-altering beating.
Errol Spence Jr. posted these images by way of his own social media, his Instagram stories, with captions like, "My head is held up like a nosebleed. I was brought up old."
Old law, where men don't make excuses. Even if I had one, I wouldn't give it to you.
Spence seems to be in good spirits, putting on a brave face. He seems to be okay. Then again, he's not getting punched in the head the way he was getting punched in the head on Saturday. I think what's alarming people is the same thing that alarmed me after just 3 or 4 rounds.
He unraveled too quickly.
I think I first noticed something different about Errol in the Danny Garcia fight, though it wasn't that noticeable. He wasn't receiving the punches the same way that he used to. It was more or less there in the Danny Garcia fight, more noticeable in the Ugas fight, that even though Ugas didn't throw a lot of punches or land a lot of punches, whatever he did land, it had a noticeable effect on Errol.
And Ugas is not known for power. He's not known as a big puncher.
Errol Spence Jr. sort of pauses when he's hit now, whether it's a hook or an uppercut or just a simple jab. He sort of freezes as if he's rattled for a moment, dazed.
It's not normal, though. It's whenever somebody gets in. It's whenever he gets touched, even if it's just a simple jab.
I believe that is where the concern is coming from, that Errol is not receiving these punches and wearing these punches well, and it all came to a head this past Saturday, that when he fought Terence Crawford, he unraveled too quickly. Now, I've always felt that Crawford would beat him, even before the accident, before any of this stuff. I had Crawford winning a fight.
This stuff, these intangibles just made me that much more confident what his body's been through the last 4 years, and that he has been campaigning as a welterweight for a very long time.
All of these are things that can affect a fighter's punch resistance, whether it's his brain being jostled in the car accident or simply making a weight for too long.
When people say that Errol should contemplate retirement, it's because they're questioning his physical state based on what he's been through the last 4 years.
And how he unraveled very quickly in Saturday's fight. I mean, that wasn't a fight that's had the same aesthetic as, say, De La Hoya versus Trinidad or Mayweather versus Pacquiao.
It wasn't competitive. When you consider that Igis Kavaliauskas was actually more competitive with Crawford than Errol was.
One of several fighters that Errol Spence Jr.'s obnoxious faction of fans so easily dismiss as not being any good, time has once again proven them wrong about something else. Igis did better against Crawford than Errol did.
So how do they explain it?
Never mind, you're not going to get a cohesive thought out of those guys and gals. The bottom line is, it is true that Igis actually did better and looked better, at least was more competitive a while longer than Errol was, but Errol is supposed to be levels above an Igis Kavaliauskas, or is he?
Did that car accident jostle his brain? Did it knock his brain loose to where now, whenever he gets touched, he gets a little dazed, a little woozy?
Doesn't ride the punch, wear the punches the same way that he used to because his brain's been knocked loose. Maybe a little.
Point can be raised that Errol Spence Jr. passes his medicals, doesn't he? The medicals for the Garcia fight, the medicals for the Ugas fight, the more recent medicals for the Crawford fight.
I mean, if he's passing his medicals and he's getting cleared to fight, he should be all right. But I'm just telling you, this is where the concern comes from, that for a fight of this magnitude, on this scale, what is supposed to be this era's De La Hoya versus Trinidad or Mayweather versus Pacquiao, the aesthetic was far too lopsided, and Errol unraveled too quickly after 4 rounds.
4 rounds, it looked like he was in a 15-rounder.
It was after just 4 rounds. I guess that the opposing argument could be that if Errol wasn't able to take those punches well, he wasn't wearing them well, and it seemed like he was always dazed by Terence Crawford's jab, that could also be that he stayed at the weight too long. And if he moves up to 154, he'll be a little bit more durable up there and take the punches better.
Right.
That's the opposing view.
I don't think he beats Terence Crawford at any weight. 147, 154, I don't really think it matters. He's too simple for Crawford.
But that perhaps what we're seeing is a fighter who overstayed his welcome at a weight, and he can't take punches there anymore. It's not healthy. He's got to move up. It's about time.
The takeaway for me is that whatever Errol decides to do, what he shouldn't do is fight Terence again. Not straight away.
Because if the car accident didn't leave him permanently damaged, the beating that he suffered this past Saturday, that sustained beating over 9 rounds with 3 knockdowns.
If you know anything about this sport, you'll know that it's actually better that you get knocked out in the first round than take a beating over 9.
Still end up getting knocked out. It's those sustained beatings that do the most damage and shave years off a fighter's career. That is the fear.
I don't know if Stephen A. Smith was saying what he was saying for reactions. I just know that he's not the only person I've seen saying it. And I think the fear is that Errol may go out there one too many times and
that he may suffer irreparable damage that would thereby affect his quality of life moving forward. We want to see a good fight, but we don't want to see a guy turn into an invalid. This past week was a very hard week for a certain section, a certain faction of fight fans here in the YTBC and the online boxing community. It was a very hard week because several myths got busted in one fell swoop in just a matter of days.
Inoue being a manufactured hype job by way of Top Rank, those who disregarded him being a 3-division champion, now a 4-division champion.
The ones who swore up and down that Stephen Fulton, because he was an American fighter of American descent, he was going to annihilate him. He was going to expose him,
right,
quote-unquote, outbox him.
Even though he knew he had already been a champion at more weights and had already fought more world champions than Stephen Fulton, consider that Paul Butler lasted longer than Stephen Fulton. Nonito Donaire, who was way older when he fought Inoue in the first fight than Stephen is now, he put up a way better fight than Stephen did.
Mythbusters, many myths got busted this past week, and that was one of them, that Stephen Fulton was better in fact, than anyone he knew he fought so far. Well, if he was better, he didn't perform that way.
And he obviously didn't perform better than Inoue, but he didn't perform better than some of Inoue's old opponents either.
Intended to be the slick American boxer, the defensive specialist, I think that Paul Butler showed more defensive prowess than Stephen did. Paul Butler, who was so easily disregarded by Inoue's critics, who also happened to be Stephen Fulton's fans. Nothing against Stephen Fulton, the fighter. I still respect him. I still like him. I just think there is a toxic faction of fans in the YTBC and the online community that are hurting right now, and they should be.
Mythbusters.
Inoue proved to be a mythbuster this past week, as did Terence Crawford, who for so long was marginalized, by that same group of people, that same faction of fans. Not just him, but his opponents. Whoever he beat was automatically relegated to being no good.
Just because he beat him.
A two-time Olympian in Igis Kavaliauskas, the Mean Machine, was automatically relegated to being no good just because Terence Crawford fought him, just because Terence Crawford beat him. We were intended to believe that Errol Spence Jr. was levels above and Igis Kavaliauskas, but in hindsight, Igis actually did better against Terence than Errol did.
Mythbusters.
Was Errol Spence Jr.'s quality of competition really that much better than Terence's? Was it? Or was it
Smoke and mirrors.
window dressing all this time?
Smoke and mirrors.
Mythbusters. The myth that Errol Spence Jr.'s quality of competition and welterweight resume so far was head and shoulders above Terence Crawford's, even though they both fought Sean Porter. They both fought the same guy, and the difference was that when Terence fought him, he was more dominant and he stopped him.
Errol didn't.
They both fought Kell Brook.
What was missing on Terence's resume that you could find on Errol's? What, Danny Garcia? Being honest with you, I'm not sure that Danny Garcia could beat the Igis Kavaliauskas that Terence beat.
Not kidding around. I'm not playing. You saw how Danny looked with Jose Benavidez. Where Terence Crawford stopped a then unbeaten Jose Benavidez years before, years later, all Danny could do was circle around him and outpoint him. He couldn't stop him like Terence did.
Mythbusters.
The myth that PBC had all the best fighters at welterweight. The myth that Errol's resume was head and shoulders above Terence's. Time itself and the performances are telling a very different story. Danny Garcia is intended to be one of these top-tier, top-notch fighters on Errol's resume. Ahead of this weekend's fight, I remember Errol saying that Danny was the best counterpuncher in either the division or the sport.
Yeah, he said something like that, and I scratched my head.
Mythbusters. That was just window dressing all this time. How many times did I tell you that Danny Garcia is not at 147 who he was close to 10 years ago at 140? He has no elite wins as a welterweight. So while you're lording Errol Spence Jr.'s resume around, trying to lord it over Terence Crawford, where's the substance?
Where?
The real substance.
Where is it?
My previous segment, we talked about Stephen A. Smith's contention that perhaps Errol should contemplate retirement based on how he performed, how he looked, how he was wearing the shots. You will find that most of those out there that are outraged are the same people I'm talking about now. The same people that don't know the ball from the bounce.
Nope.
The same people that told you Fulton was going to expose Inoue and Errol was going to crush Terence. It's the same people.
It's the same mouth breathers.
Many of them are content creators here in the YTBC.
That anyone would actually go to these people to listen to their takes on the sport of boxing after this week, that's incredible.
I mean, Wilder getting beat the hell up by Tyson Fury in 2 fights over the course of 2 years, that's one thing. But this past week, it had to be a hard pill to swallow.
It's a common denominator.
PBC fighters, the PBC that they hold so dearly, the PBC that they talk up so much.
It's one common denominator.
2 fighters coming off over a year of inactivity is another. Both Stephen Fulton and Errol Spence Jr. had not fought in the last 12 months. And how many times do you hear me harp about that?
Jermel Charlo's another.
And now what they want to do is transfer all their energy into another unbeaten fighter in Jaron Boots Ennis, when these guys are more like a jinx.
Oh, you want to jinx him now too?
Mythbusters.
You want to see that myth get busted?
As much as these guys like to quote the late, great Roger Mayweather, it's these guys that Roger Mayweather was talking about, because these guys don't know shit about boxing.
Don't know shit about boxing.
Likely want to gravitate towards Errol Spence Jr. being drained or being out too long, but these were the circumstances ahead of the fight, and you still picked him. You still said he was going to crush Terence Crawford, so you don't get to switch up now.
Mythbusters.
You want everybody to believe that any fighter that isn't a PBC fighter, any fighter that isn't one of Heyman's boys, is automatically no good, but you're finding out little by little it's the opposite.
You're finding out, and people are finding you out.
Obnoxious mongoloids that you spawn, that you create with your misinformation, your inferior brand of boxing talk.
Mythbusters.
We have these 2 Mythbusters to thank: Terence Bud Crawford and Naoya Inoue, the monster.
They're the ones that peed in your cornflakes.
Have a bite. Just in keeping with the theme of this past week's action and the continued fallout from it, former unified welterweight champion Keith Thurman has called out Terence Crawford following his knockout win over Errol Spence. I want that next, but I've got to stay busy. Let me get back to work, and then hopefully, like I've always done, I've made some of the biggest and most exciting fights in the division. I mean, He's saying that he wants Terrence Crawford, but he also sounds like he's putting it off, like he doesn't want to climb in there with him just yet. Keith Thurman is yet another PBC fighter who's coming off over a year of inactivity. The Mario Barrios fight, what was intended to be a get-back fight and a tune-up fight, that was over a year ago.
You hear what he says? Let me get back to work, and then, hopefully...
If you don't want the guy next, just say you don't want the guy next. Say you need a tune-up fighter. Don't say nothing at all. The problem is, if you don't say nothing at all, the awkward silence. I mean, you positioned yourself to challenge for the WBC title by way of the WBC. You're supposed to want the winner of this fight, though underneath it all, I don't really think Keith wants Terrence Crawford.
Come on.
Why put your life in jeopardy sharing the ring with Terrence Crawford when you can wait for him to move up and pick up a vacant WBC title against some ham and egg guy?
I think the silver lining for Keith is that whether he really wants this fight or not, he's just talking because he's got a mouth. He's just putting on for the cameras and putting on a show.
Well, he always does. Whether he wants Terrence next or not, it's not likely that he's going to get him. Terrence Crawford might move right up to 154 along with Errol. Maybe he fights him up there, or maybe he fights somebody else, but it does seem like Terrence's welterweight campaign has finally come to an end, and he can move on. That Keith Thurman is not so relevant here today that anyone will hold it against Terrence that he didn't fight him, because Errol was widely perceived as being a better fighter than Keith.
Yeah, sure. Terrence could stick around and beat up on some of these guys. He could beat up on Keith Thurman, Alexis Rocha, maybe Jaron Boots Ennis. I do see a slight demand for that fight, but why do that when you can move up and weight and become a 4-division champion in your very next fight by way of your WBO Super Champion status?
The same status that he used to become Jeff Horn's mandatory challenger is the same status that he can now use to become Tim Tszyu's mandatory challenger. It could happen. There's not much in it for Terrence Crawford in staying at welterweight, and in spite of what Keith Thurman is saying.
What does Terrence Crawford versus Keith Thurman do at the box office? Is that really going to intrigue the fight fans? We know what's going to happen.
Especially if you were to get him next. I mean, you're coming off a year of inactivity, just like Errol, and you see what he did to him. What would he do to you?
You know.
I think Tim Tszyu makes for a more interesting, intriguing fight, intriguing challenge for Terrence Crawford, the two-time undisputed champion, than today's Keith Thurman. We all know Keith really just wants a vacant title.
Come on.